The origin story of Anakin Skywalker shows him as a pilot.
I'm the only human who can do it.
You must have Jedi reflexes if you race bots.
Anakin meets his best friend in Episode 1, already a pilot.
When I first knew him, your father was already a great pilot.
We always knew that would happen. Obi-Wan said so.
From a certain point of view.
That's a handy skill, because the plot has a tricky obstacle.
Let him take that back, huh? He'll find what he needs.
Qui-Gon needs free stuff from a boy who has nothing.
He gives without any thought of reward.
To solve this, Anakin's piloting expertise gives him prize money from winning a race.
The boy's good, no doubts there.
That's about the simplest and most elegant solution possible. Luke started the movie owning 2 vehicles, and Anakin has 1. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to give your characters.
Can you help him?
I don't know. I didn't actually come here to free slaves. May the Force be with you.
What is a pod racer specifically? A type of anti-gravity sled with oversized engines. Pod racers use a different engine technology from most vehicles in Star Wars. The most common drive in the galaxy is the Horch-Kessel Ion engine. These are the sublight engines seen on all starships. Speeder bikes use only repulsor lift drives. Pod racers use both turbojet engines and repulsors. Anti-gravity tech allows the pod and engines to hover instead of needing wings like a jet aeroplane. Jet engines breathe air, so they don't work in space. Jar Jar gets his hand stuck in the air intake at the front of the engine. The air passes through the engine, is combined with fuel, and comes out the exhaust. Oddly, there doesn't seem to be enough room for fuel on the pod. Arguably, that is the case for most spaceships as well, but pod racers are very bare. From this, we can infer that Star Wars fuel is very dense and efficient. At this point, it's time to discuss another aspect of jet engines. Not all the air that comes in the front needs to go through the entire engine. Instead of using jet thrust, it's possible to use a turbine to run a propeller. Just replace the piston engine with a turbine one. It's a little more complicated than that sounds, but the point is it's possible. That would be turboshaft and turboprop engines. The other option is to combine the propeller with the intake turbine. This creates a turbofan engine, still much like a propeller. Instead of generating thrust from the engine exhaust, it uses air flowing outside the engine wall. The intake fan bites into the air, propelling the jet forward. Part is diverted into the engine, the rest flows along beside. To look for a turbofan, we expect it to be wider at the front with a smaller core. There also needs to be a gap for the air bypass. Relatively few pod racers use engines like on a jumbo jet. The pod racer is quite an unusual craft. While they aren't unique to Star Wars, very few go into as much detail as Phantom Menace. The sound effects don't sound like jet engines either, not entirely. The X-Wing sounds more like a jet than the pod racer does. It's clear that this is really a car race, just without the car. The result is some of the most glorious machinery I've ever seen in science fiction. We sometimes call the Millennium Falcon a hot rod, but pod races are on another level. For one thing, they spin. Another fun thing about pod races is that every one is unique. Let's take a closer look at some individual examples.
And in the front row, near side pole position, Mahonic.
Before we can talk about Mahonic, we need to talk about Diablo 2. There is the Moon Clan, Blood Clan, and the Death Clan. Mahonic, he is a relatively famous racer, a Gran, the Three Eyes Goats of planet Kinyen. Gran are described as highly social, yet have a reputation as criminals. This is because of Ree-Yeez, a Gran from Jabba's palace. He was exiled for his crimes, which is worse than you might expect. It seems that it doesn't take much before they're driven mad by loneliness. In the prequels, they are said to be from Malastare. That was resolved by saying Malastare is one of their earliest colonies. Mahonic is later determined to be from another Gran colony, Hock. We can speculate on why Mahonic might choose to race pods. His pod racer is quite unusual. It is a Galactic Power Engineering GPE 3130. The cockpit has a smooth casing in a pale green. His engines are the smallest of any in the race, at least in length. There are also an extra set of outriggers on the outside. These must be quite powerful and lightweight. Where other racers go for size above all, Mahonic cares about power to weight ratio. We can tell he must be confident in his skill as a pilot. The engines are likely also advanced, expensive, precise.
I'll tell you later.
I see the contestants are making their way out onto the starting grid. Gear system. Tea time, winner bowls roll.
In the Bunta Eve race, Mahonic was the first pod racer to be destroyed, rammed by Sebulba, the main antagonist of Tatooine. The game gives him exceptional traction and cooling. Turning and top speed are below average, and acceleration and braking are terrible. Another very strange choice is to put the exhaust on the outriggers. During the race, no visible exhaust comes from either the main body or the outriggers. That would mean the smaller side engines are mostly there as afterburners for a boost. The next person to lose the race was Rats Terrell, an Alina from the planet Aline. This is one of my favourites because I like his Volkov-Strude Titan 2150 engines. Nice large intake at the front, and quite a unique design of exhaust nozzle. If there is any benefit to having large engines, and I suspect there might be, Rats has the size. It might take a lot of tinkering, but there is endless potential. Rats' engines look like a good example of a low bypass turbofan. There is only a small gap for the bypass duct, and it may not even be a turbofan. By altering the ratio, this jet engine produces more thrust from the exhaust. Terrell's exhaust nozzle is an unusual star pattern, far smaller than the intake. I will constantly interpret this, intake larger than exhaust, to mean speed. With large engines and a low bypass turbofan, they should have high performance. Rats Terrell ought to do well. He does not. Rats becomes a fireball after what's known as a CFS, a controlled flight into a stalagmite. This happens on the first lap, which makes you wonder how much experience Terrell has. In the game, he has one particularly bad stat: acceleration. That is mighty strange. I would expect the exact opposite. The game gives him quite good traction and top speed. Turning and braking are also respectable. The in-game model also has a higher bypass ratio and a visible exhaust flame. The movie shows no visible exhaust and only a small gap behind the intake. The game model has a wider intake and narrower body than in the movie. Both versions look good, but this is not the most accurate likeness. There is also no bypass duct in the game. Behind the intake is solid metal. The cockpit has an array of rudder vanes on the sides, a moderately prominent animation.
And not your Quadraneros from the Twin system.
Ben Quadraneros clearly was named after his pod racer instead of the other way around. Ben is announced as being from the Tund system. It turns out his species is the Tung, of planet Tungel. His pod is given the name Bolter Trabat, BT-310. Each engine is 4.5 meters long. This design is exactly what it looks like. There are 4 engines, but each one is the smallest in the race. It would appear that complexity was its undoing. Literally, the pod racer flies apart on the starting line.
Ooh, there goes Quadraneros power coupling.
This is described as engine trouble, but that isn't the case.
Well, it looks like Quadraneros is having engine trouble also.
The engines are idling just fine, and indeed have enough thrust to fly away. The fault lies in the sci-fi equipment attached to the engines. The most visible failure is of the energy binders. These are the purple energy arcing between the engines. We can infer that they hold the engines together, which does make sense. The repulsor lifts keep the engines up, but there is no chassis on a pod racer. The engines aren't bolted to anything. The pod racer is not so much a vehicle as it is a collection of parts flying in formation. There must be a way to synchronize the repulsors. That's probably in the binders too. Given the way these pod racers can rev their engines, we can also tell that the repulsor lifts can act as brakes. The question of anti-gravity traction is one we can't easily test. However, we can tell other properties by looking at the engines themselves. Excitingly, we can tell Ben Quadraneros has exactly what we're looking for. His engines are large at the front intake fan and narrow behind. These are the turbofans we expected not to see. We have a good look at the back of the intake fan. That looks like a lot of air bypassing the core of the engine to me. The pod racer itself should be a powerful design. It might have a lower top speed than other pods, but I expect good acceleration. The weak point here is mostly in the pilot. Another significant factor could be sabotage, of course. It is rumored that Ark Bumpy Ruse might have been to blame. In the game, most of Ben's stats are very low. Quadraneros has good traction and an exceptional top speed. Braking, cooling, acceleration and turning are about as bad as can be. A visually interesting craft, you could certainly do worse than this.
And hoping for a big win today, Odi Mandrell.
Next to set out the race is Odi Mandrell, an Urkit. Like Anakin, Tatooine is Odi's homeworld. He is notable for his pit droids, according to the movie. I can see why he invested in pit droids. His engines are already great. They are Exelbrock XL 5115 turbofans, clearly. They are some of the largest and heaviest engines in the race. His pod is another of my favourites, along with Rat's Tyrrell. If I had either of these machines, I would not go looking for a replacement, only incremental upgrades to the base engine. Naturally, it's one of my favourites to play in the racer game. These engines also match the target profile. The air intakes are enormous, but at the back they're as small as Anakin's engines. This means it's time to introduce another term for turbofans. Bypass ratio refers to how much air is pushed by the fan, instead of going into the combustion chamber. Rats and Quadraneros have low bypass turbofans. These generate a good amount of thrust from the air the engine breathes. The fan helps, especially at lower speeds. Overall, they are still jet engines. Odi Mandrell has a high bypass engine design. At the center is a powerful turbine engine, which drives an enormous fan. Thrust from the engine itself is minimal, though it looks like he has an afterburner. To tell which engine type is optimal, the rule of thumb is that turbofans are good below the speed of sound. For a supersonic plane, the turbojet is preferred. That's very interesting because I have their speed listed here. Sebulba can reach 829 km an hour. Anakin reckons his is the fastest ever built, at 947 km an hour. If you believe his estimate, nobody has a pod that can break the sound barrier, let alone Mach 2 or 3. That means Odi Mandrell has chosen wisely. He can apply an incredible amount of force with a fan that size. This may not be the perfect trade-off. It is definitely a good balance, especially with access to an afterburner. That increases the thrust through the center, changing the ratios. In the game, his stats are generally quite high. The weakness is top speed with acceptable turning and cooling. Everything else is above average, making Odie a good choice in the game. One more thing. We're introduced to Odie Mandrell with praise for his team of pit droids.
With his record-setting pit droid team.
How good are these droids? One of them walks into the intake of the jet engine. It does not seem overly harmed, but the engine is destroyed. There is no way it could be repaired in time to finish the race. And yet, what's this? There is a shot here of a many-armed food salesman. In the background, a large pod racer goes past. If we pause on the right frame, this is unquestionably Odie Mandrell. Yet the food salesman shot was placed after Odie's engine was wrecked. If everything in the movies is canon, perhaps Odie had a spare engine standing by. Otherwise, the pit droids rebuilt the engine in 30 seconds. An editing error? Maybe, but certain rules would say it must also be canon. The next racer is quite odd. A Fui from the planet Fu. Mars Guo has some of the largest engines in the race, mostly. They are named Kolor Pondrat Plug 2 Behemoth. These have a large diameter at the front and back. From the side, we can see the engines go very narrow in the middle. However, from above, we see that the width is consistent. Most jet engines are rotationally symmetrical. Not exactly, there are all sorts of pipes and wires on the surface. Having a rectangular section like this is very unexpected. Looking from the back, this is quite informative. We see that the exhaust only comes out in a flat line. All the vertical parts in the back half seem to be unimportant. There are clearly slats here, so perhaps they're for steering. Diverting part of the exhaust out one of these ducts changes the thrust vector. That seems like a good idea to have in your engines. Most pods do not have thrust vectoring. Another surprising detail is how quickly it narrows. The intake fan on a jet engine is called the compressor. Normally this means a series of turbine stages all in a line. These are used on Anakin's engines and are called axial compressors. They extend along and rotate around the central axis. Mars Guo has a different kind. There is only room for a centrifugal compressor. These are wide instead of long and produce a shape much more like Mars's engines. Instead of directing it backwards, the intake air is flung to the outside edge. In the case of Mars Guo, it must be concentrated into two ducts on the sides. That explains the rectangular shape of the engine's core. This air will feed a fairly large combustion chamber. Overall, it would seem Mars Guo has quite a good racer. As with Odie Mandrell, the air intake is a vulnerability. Still, the large cross-section for a small exhaust should mean high speed. In the game, Mars Guo has quite good stats overall. There is a notable weakness in cooling, the stat used for the boost system. Top speed and traction are particularly good. Everything else is above average. You acquire this pod early in the campaign. It is a good choice as your main pod racer. The next racer to be knocked out is Teemto Pagalies, a Vecnoid from Munus Mandel. On the Canyon Dune turn, there are Tusken Raiders taking potshots. All it takes is one solid hit to the engine to cause utter destruction. Bit of a shame, because Teemto is my favourite of them all. In the pod racer game, I have played Teemto more than all the other pods combined. All the pod racers are unique, but some are more unique than others. Teemto Pagalies has the least aerodynamic cockpit pod of anything in the race. The leading edge is not so much a blade to cut through the air, more of a flat brick. On the other hand, this pod is also the most complex one. The trailing edge is a rudder, which is probably of some use. The rudder animation is a large part of why I like flying this in the game. The cockpit has two other features. One of these is a large lever entering the cockpit from outside. The cross-section labels this as the main throttle, but that can't be right. We can see Teemto's wrist move as he revs the engine. This is a motorbike control scheme. rotate the hand grip to increase power. Obviously, your choice of controls will depend on what limbs you have. Anakin has a similar near-human body layout to Teemto. He also uses similar controls. The other neat feature of the cockpit is based on its circular shape. It was decided that this has a heavy gyroscope running around the ring of the cockpit. That would mean Teemto Pagales has 2 extra systems in his cockpit beyond everyone else. On top of that, he also needs a screen on the inside of the cockpit. Since it blocks his view forward, this allows all sorts of sensors and readouts.
It must be tricky facing backwards and driving by TV monitor.
You get used to it.
Where Anakin and Sebulba have to look down for their displays, Teemto has it all in one place. Teemto's engines are visually interesting. These are called the IPG X1131 Longtail, made by Iadani Performance Group, the longest in the race. They have the feature of large spinning intakes, which looks wonderful as ever. The most unique feature is a cowling on the upper half of the engine, a very distinct look. The intakes are not significantly larger than the engine body either. That means these are the first engines to be a simple turbojet. No bypass duct after the fan to act like a propeller. All the air goes through the engine to generate jet thrust. That is associated with far higher speeds. With all of this put together, this is a pod racer I like above every other. Teemto rams Anakin, much like Sebulba did. He's a solid bet, if you were to gamble on these awful races. In the game, he has good stats in most categories. Top speed is the notable weakness, which can be fixed with upgrades. Turning and cooling are also not particularly great. Traction, acceleration, and braking are all above average. Speaking of Sebulba, he is a strange one. I've heard it said that walking on his hands is a personal decision, that most of his species, the Dugs, walk in a way we would consider normal. This is a fascinating idea, but it doesn't line up with the other information we have. Nothing I can find points to Sebulba walking differently from other Dugs. The evolution of this knowledge is quite interesting. When Qui-Gon thinks about pod racing, the first planet that comes to mind is Malastare.
They're pod racing on Malastare. Very fast, very dangerous.
This name is spoken twice in The Phantom Menace. The second time, one of the goat men names himself the Congress of Malastare.
The Congress of Malastare concurs with the Honorable Delegate from the Trade Federation.
All of this would be fine in isolation until you try to put it all together. The expanded universe had already named the world of the Grand Trigoats. That completely changes the political implications of the scene. Lucas probably intended Malastare to be the goat planet. Star Wars disagreed with George Lucas on that matter. The Gran are usually assumed to be evil, because one appeared in Jabba's palace. The Gran must have another seat for the planet Kinyan. Malastare becomes a colony. Sebulba is given the pod racing planet as his homeworld. Suddenly, Dugs are native to the planet Malastare instead of the Gran. As with many colonies, it turns out someone else had already called dibs on the land. The Dugs have the Good Continent on the west. The Old Republic established a spaceport on the eastern continent. Gran decided to settle there from off-world in significant numbers.
Just scrawny dough pot, Slimo.
Next is one of the strangest machines in the race. Where many engines have a massive circular intake fan, Sebulba does not. His engines are named Split X, which does line up. Kolor Pondrat Plug F Mammoth Split X, to be precise. Perhaps each one is supposed to remind you of a V8. The good thing is that all the front surfaces seem to be air intakes. The cross-sections book also decides the Split X has the repulsor lifts in it. These engines are as large as any other, only the X is unusual. On the inside, we find both types of compressor I mentioned. Starting behind the X intakes, there is the axial compressor we see at the front of most Podracer engines. This drawing has either 7 or 8 stages to the compressor, which sounds entirely normal. Anakin's is specified to be 8 stages. Behind Sebulba's axial compressor is a centrifugal one. This arrangement is not uncommon, though it was unexpected. What I do find bizarre is a system of baffles. After leaving the compressors, the airflow needs to make 2 turns of 180 degrees. That strikes me as a distinctly bad idea. When you put corners in a pipe, that usually causes it to slow down. This is the hot part of the engine, where the fuel is injected and ignited. Perhaps that's enough to offset any losses from the U-bend. After that, there is a final spike like on other engines. In this case, the end cone is fully hidden inside the engine. Finally, there is an afterburner nozzle. Another questionable choice is the jet fuel. The placement is right next to the hottest part of the engine. There are fuel tanks built into the afterburner exhaust nozzle. There is an annular fuel tank wrapped around the centrifugal compressor. This is a good idea in some ways, given that the fuel is near the places it needs to go. It also seems like a relatively small amount of space, given how much fuel these engines must burn. We can assume the fuel used is extremely dense and efficient. Also that it can be stored safely at high temperatures, given the location of these tanks. We do have a name for the fuel. It is tritium power fluid, pressurized with quadronium. It is activated with injectrine. Now, granted, that's all a load of nonsense. Power fluid makes sense, that's just a term for jet fuel. Tritium is capitalized, so that's likely a brand name. Some specific formula that is stable for transport, even if not ideal for usage as fuel. It's hard to account for what quadronium might be, how it would add pressure. Likely, this is a fuel additive that helps it stay compressed in the tank. Finally, the fuel needs to be activated.
Hello, Evelyn, is this Microsoft Tech Support?
Yes, this is Microsoft Tech Support. How may I help you today?
This could mean the jet engine runs on a 2-part fuel mix. Or, if it has been stabilized for transport, activating undoes that process. Injectrine could also be some kind of fuel accelerant to help the engine burn.
And 3.
Perhaps injectrine releases oxygen as it burns somehow.
2. 1.
That would allow for the engine to run more fuel-rich than is possible otherwise. Sebulba is notable for one other thing. He wins by having the fastest pod racer that's still in working order. This can be through sabotage, as in the case of Anakin's pod. Perhaps the problems Quaterneros had weren't entirely his fault. For Maz Guo and Mohonic, it's through overt action during the race. For this, Sebulba often has weapons on his pod, such as a flamethrower. This would have been used in a deleted scene against Anakin.
It wasn't my fault, really. Sebulba flashed me with his vents. I actually saved the pod. Mostly.
The EU tells us that Clegg Holdfast's pod was destroyed by flamethrower during the race.
Why do you think that?
He always wins.
The advantage of using a flamethrower is the lack of evidence. Since you already have jet fuel running through the engine, nothing looks suspicious. There will always be heat damage to the engines, so it isn't evidence against Sebulba. There's no need to carry fuel for the flamethrower either. It can operate using the fire of the engines themselves. In the cross-sections, it looks like a side door next to the combustion chamber. It could even be disguised as an access hatch for working on the engine itself, to access the fuel injectors or something. A key part of Sebulba's strategy is to have his weaponry removed before his pod can be inspected. This also goes for Maz Guo, throwing a lump of metal into the engine intakes. After the part has been thrown, there is no evidence left in Sebulba's pod. Before the flame emitter, his earliest weapons included a nail launcher, far less subtle than a flame, more likely to get you caught. It specified launching a stream of nails into faces instead of the engine intakes. That seems like a particularly bad idea. It wouldn't line up with the normal injuries to pilots. As Sebulba's pod was obliterated during the race, he needed a replacement.
Mom, we sold the pod! Look at all the money we have!
Oh my goodness, but that's so wonderful, Annie!
He ended up buying Anakin's pod from Qui-Gon and went on to use it. In the game, Sebulba has terrible stats. Traction is good, turning is acceptable, everything else is abysmal. The only positive feature is one of the highest top speeds in the game. This lines up with what we would expect, a focus on a single aspect. Sebulba wants speed, and the rest isn't very important. He doesn't win through piloting skill, like Mahonic and Gasgano. The game also lacks the deep, slow ticking sound from the movie. It seems the game was made before the sound effects in the movie were finalized. Fair enough, and I imagine it'd be easy enough to mod in the engine sound. The problem with Sebulba in the game is that Quaterneros is arguably the better choice.
It's working! It's working!
The perfect contrast to Sebulba is little Annie Skywalker. They are both short, though Anakin will continue growing. Sebulba uses the largest engines that are allowed by cheating. He discourages anyone from looking too closely at the race rules with regard to his pod. The only human pod racer pilot takes a different approach. His engines are smaller than anything else in the race, with only 2 coming close. Ben Quaterneros has smaller engines, but twice as many. Elan Mac and Ark Ruse have quite small engines, but they're still larger than Annie's. We'll get to the remaining races after discussing the chosen one. Mostly, his small engines are to make Skywalker the underdog. All the other races have bigger and more expensive cars than our hero. Everyone in this race literally has inhuman reaction times, including the human.
I'm the only human who can do it.
You must have Jedi reflexes if you race pods.
Anakin's pod racer shows his mechanical ability as much as his piloting skills.
Our ship was damaged and we're stranded here until we can repair it.
I can help. I can fix anything.
I believe you can.
He obtains parts by getting them for free, salvaged or given away. Each part is seen as worthless, too damaged to justify repairing.
I built a racer. It's the fastest ever. Waldo doesn't know I've built it. You could make him think it was yours.
The result is the fastest pod ever built, extremely valuable. The engines appear to be standard turbojet engines. They are Radon Olza 620C that had been discarded as unusable. At the front there is an air intake and compressor. This is listed as an 8-stage main compressor, a normal number for a jet engine. Then the airflow passes the fuel injectors and enters the combustion chamber. Finally, it exits the thrust nozzle to create thrust. The engine gets work done by adding and burning fuel. More gas comes out the back of the engine than went in, and at higher speed. The nozzle at the end is a key part of turning that gas into thrust. Anakin has a cone at the center of his exhaust nozzle, which is a common feature of jet engines. The center of the jet has metal in it, so the airflow needs to merge back when exiting. It's also preferable to have the exhaust pressure match the atmospheric pressure. Having a nozzle that can move like this allows much more control over what the engine is doing. The secret of Anakin's speed is said to be his fuel atomizer and distribution systems. In a change from the original design, far more fuel is added. Additionally, this is a finely calculated modification. These engines are extremely efficient, getting maximum burn from all of that fuel. We can assume this extra combustion uses as much oxygen as possible too. The cross-sections say the entire engine is an afterburner. That sounds silly at face value. How can you have an afterburner unless there's a before burner? I think I've found the answer, and I've never heard anyone mention this before. Pod racer engines are not turbojet engines. They appear to be, but there is one critical detail missing from the cross-section drawings. A turbine engine works by having 2 turbine clusters on the same shaft. The rear turbine is set after the combustion chamber, and it powers the intake compressor. This works because fuel is added and burnt in between the two turbines. Pod racers do not work in the same way. There is no rear set of turbines to power the intake. See the large structure in the center of Anakin's intakes? That is labeled the turbine drive motor. There is no power turbine because the engine runs on electricity. The jet fuel is used only to create thrust for propulsion, not to spin the intake turbine. On a real jet engine, electric motors would be used to start the engine, never to power it during flight like a pod racer.
Here, use this power charge.
Yes, sir.
Come on, kids up. Let's move away.
Suddenly it makes sense for Qui-Gon to hand Anakin a power charge pack. With a space battery from the starship,
anyway,
the cockpit pod has enough juice to spin the turbines.
The mechanical load of the compressor is because it does a tremendous amount of work. It compresses air. And if it was driven by an electric motor, it would need 30,000 horsepower.
This explains the idea of the entire engine being an afterburner. Without the rear turbine, the engine can move directly from intake compressor to the extra fuel injectors. This also explains another feature from the movie, the spill air doors. These flaps could be mistaken for air brakes. They are placed right behind the intake compressor, before the combustion chamber. The doors are most clearly seen when Anakin has an engine fire. Normally, there should not be fire that far forward in the engine. It has travelled forward from the fuel injectors, a definite malfunction. Anakin closes the spill air door and the fire goes out. I don't understand why that would help, but I can't say it's the wrong choice. This engine was sabotaged by Sebulba before the race started. Given the location of the engine fire, the broken part must be a fuel line. To me it looks more like an electrical part, but I'm not a jet engine mechanic. Little Annie knows exactly what he's doing, for this problem and the others during the race. These problems are necessary to demonstrate his piloting skill, beyond just winning a race. It's also likely Anakin disabled the fuel feed from the main tank in his left engine. There are two fuel tanks aboard Anakin's pod. One is in the central shaft of the intake compressor. The other is in the exhaust nozzle. The central cone is a fuel tank. They hold a less exotic fuel than Sebulba uses, a simple blend. Straight tritium power fluid, activated with injectrine, no additives. This is probably less of a choice, more that the race entry fee only covers the basics.
How can you do this? Not on Republic credits, I think, huh?
My ship will be the entry fee.
Oh, not bad, not bad, huh?
There will be a big tank full of tritium and a little one of injectrine, most likely spaced out. Wouldn't want them to leak at the same time.
Whoa!
After the fire is out, Anakin has lost the fuel reserve from that engine. Either he dumped the fuel on purpose, or it leaked out from the sabotaged fuel line. Annie's next move is to reach for a patch cable. This has a curly wire and a double-pronged connector. This redirects a resource from the right engine to the left. Fuel would need to be pumped along the control cables, through the pod to the other engine. Electricity could pass through the purple energy binder instead. The result is enough to keep both engines running, with reserves for multiple laps of racing. The next control we see used is a momentary switch. This is the ignition, and I will hear no arguments to the contrary. Anakin reaches for this switch exactly 4 times in the movie. First was during the engine test before the race. Second, to start the engines as the race begins. Third, to restart his engines after he stalls them. Fourth, after one of his engines has a flame out and shuts down. This ignition switch is never used when the engines are running. This sort of consistent control scheme is what makes the pod racer sequence work. Even if you didn't know what this switch does, you know Anakin knows. Every time he uses it, that is the correct decision for him to have made. Other controls are less evident. The repulsor lifts are particularly hard to fathom. Once, Anakin is forced onto the service ramp. His vehicle is launched into the air, well above the hover ceiling of the repulsors. After the apex of his arc, Annie starts flicking switches. The only system it makes sense for him to fiddle with here are the repulsor lifts, to absorb the landing. It's certainly a fun shot of the cockpit, but we can't learn anything from it. A similar detail crops up after Maz Guo's pod is destroyed. In dodging the wreckage, one of Anakin's control cables detaches. His engines are held together by the energy binders, but the cockpit is free to spin. Anakin flips a switch, and on the next loop the pod stabilizes. This must be a setting for the repulsor lifts on the pod. It's just barely plausible. This is a different switch from the one used during the jump. That one would have been next in sequence, right to left, but it stopped beforehand. Coming out of the spin, Annie's pod is not in good shape. The power coupling is starting to flicker, clearly about to fail. Anakin reaches out with the tool, taking his eyes off the level terrain in front of the pod. He is able to grab the cable and reconnect it to the side of the cockpit. This is perhaps the least plausible fix in the entire race sequence. Even with inertial dampers, it should be disorienting. Grabbing the control cable also seems a bit implausible. This part was not in the version of the movie that I first saw. Perhaps something went wrong with the taping, a mistake from whoever was manning the VCR. That was probably my fault. I know part of A New Hope was missed. On the other hand, that was a part with the special edition changes, so no great loss.
And nothing of value was lost.
Even with the risks of taping this way, it's better than having ads play in the middle of the video. More likely, a different cut of the movie was chosen for broadcast. Cutting this particular scene is a good choice. The others are too important. Without the mishaps, little Annie would be entirely unbelievable. The most distinctive feature Anakin added was 2 sets of triple air scoops. These are exactly what they look like, movable vanes that bite into the air. This will be good for cornering, especially with how large they are in relation to the engines. In the pod racing game, there are also large flaps on the cockpit pod. These open when going around corners too. These are barely visible in the movie, but it's a nice bonus feature. Animations on the cockpit or engines are uncommon in this game. Fitting the central figures of the saga, there are animations on both in the game. Anakin's stats are extremely good, with 2 notable exceptions. Little Annie's pod, the fastest ever built, lacks top speed and acceleration. Traction, braking and cooling are better than most other pods. Turning is a little less exceptional. Since so many people will pick this, it makes sense for Anakin's to have good stats. It can be modified to increase its speed, just as Anakin repaired the engines. Of all the races, Gasgano is one of the more prominent. He doesn't have the largest engines, but he stands out anyway. Gasgano has a great many spindly limbs, and is very competent. He is a Zexto from the planet Troikan. Gotta love Troikan, that's where VTMB was made after all. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. His pod is a unique design from Ord Petrovia. As with Anakin and Watto or Qui-Gon, the pilot has a sponsor. Gardola the Hutt, previous owner of the Skywalkers. From the start of the race to the end, we see Gasgano right behind Sebulba. The most likely podium finish would have been Sebulba first, Timto Pagali's second, Gasgano third. As the race played out, Gasgano was in second place behind Anakin. We'll try to figure out who might be third later. For engines, there is one remarkable feature and one unique one. What is most notable is the size of the exhaust cones. The cone itself is larger than some exhaust assemblies. This means a lot of airflow is channeled into a very small ring. The result must be extremely high exhaust velocities. While the engines are fairly large, they are nowhere near the size of the competition. Gasgano achieves his success through piloting skill and clever engine design. The other two leading the pack were much less clean racers. Timto and Sebulba both attempt to ram Anakin. Gasgano blocks him from overtaking for a while, very different. Driving in such a way that your opponent can't overtake, that's entirely fair. These engines are a bit of a mystery. There is no large intake fan visible, but there is room for one. The front of Gasgano's pod engines have a pair of brackets. From seeing them in the background, it's clear there are two large flat intakes. It's unclear what happens behind those, but I suspect a centrifugal compressor. That could generate some high airflow and leave room for a large combustion chamber. In the game, Gascano has atrocious braking and cooling. Acceleration is also not particularly quick. Top speed, turning and traction are quite good. All of this can be worked around if you have enough skill as a pilot. Gascano does have that skill. A solid choice in the game, even if not the optimal one. In what has to be the second most surprising fact of this video, I have identified who could have come in third place. Anakin, Gascano, and then Ark Bumpy Roos. This is completely unexpected. His is one of the least prominent pod racers. His cockpit is one of the least aerodynamic. Nothing we see from him implies that he would be anywhere near a podium finish. It's surprising that he even survives the race. After we last see him, he collided with Dud Bolt and failed to finish the course. Ark Roos is a Nuknog from the planet Sump. Let's see what the secret to his success might be. The most distinctive feature is that his engines are really a cluster. They are named Volkov-Strude Plug 8G 927 Cluster Array. Like with Quaterneros, there are two fairly small engines on each side. The difference is that Bumpy has all four side by side, bolted to a frame. It also has a circular gap in the middle of each engine cluster.
Wow!
This would seem like an inefficient design, one that can't possibly compete with some of the larger engines. Apart from the main engines, there are several other parts to the engine cluster. There are a couple of parts 90 degrees offset from the large side engines. On the top and bottom, there are some considerably smaller tubes. Then, at 45 degrees, there are another 4 small tubes per cluster. The very bottom engine of the cluster is by far the longest. The X formation are by far the smallest. For any of this to make sense, it needs to be extreme specialization. Perhaps the smaller engines respond faster to his control inputs. It may also allow for more sophisticated thrust vectoring. Perhaps every sub-engine has a swivel to the exhaust nozzle. The other most likely advantage would be acceleration. I expect each cluster has one set of engines for a specific speed. The closest comparison we have is Mahonic, who has outriggers on his engines. These look like smaller versions of the main turbojet. It makes the most sense to me for the small ones to be optimized for low speed. The small engines give Mahonic and Ark Roos an advantage off the starting line. The same applies anytime the races slow down. Having extra small jets gives high performance, at a speed range most racers neglect. Bumpy takes that idea to an extreme, having jets with multiple different performance characteristics. As the smallest ones stop being useful, there is a slightly larger set already taking over, almost like having a gearbox to keep a single engine within its power band. In the Podracer game, this is reflected in Ark Bumpy Roos's stats. Everything is unremarkable to bad, except he has great acceleration. The pod cockpit also has a small wing that pivots from horizontal, and a rudder. The official record claims that Eldar Bedo came third. Bumpy did not finish. Still, he was definitely the next in line the last time we knew the order of races. He started back in the 4th row, and there were only 5 rows. Next to cross the finish line would be Eldar Bedo, a Glimphid from the planet Plu 2. His vehicle was made by Manta Ram Air, named a Mark IV flat twin. This is quite an interesting shape of vehicle, almost like another cluster engine. Each one has a large rectangular assembly at the front, and 2 circular exhausts. Once again, these appear to be ordinary turbojets. Chances are, these 2 turbines share a lot of machinery, like cooling, intake, fuel tanks. Unlike Ark Roos, all 4 turbines are the same size here. The cockpit also looks very interesting, insectoid even, far more aerodynamic than at least half the pods. The biggest concern with Eldar Bedo's engines is the intake size. There is only a narrow opening at the front, it even tapers in. This would seem like a bad idea, a pointless restriction on the incoming airflow. it's unclear exactly what one might find underneath those covers. Eldar seems to get similar performance to Gasgano and Teemto Pagales. We can imagine this is as much through brute force as piloting skill. The engines do have the appearance of a flying brick. Overall, I see this as one of the more practical and straightforward Podracer designs. It's just a pair of jet turbines for each engine, plus the repulsor housing and fuel tanks. Each of the jet turbines is the size of one of Anakin's engines. I fully believe the air intakes are enough to feed these. There's definitely also room for the motors to spin the compressor shaft. Eldar Bedo starts in the far side pole position, opposite Mahonic. From there, he maintains a position at the very front, in the running for a podium finish. In the game, Eldar Bedo has poor acceleration. All his other stats are moderately high, not exceptional by any means. I've become quite fond of this Podracer lately. There is a cockpit animation so minor it's hard to even detect. A couple of tiny vanes that move as the pod turns corners. It should also be mentioned that Eldar Bedo has another source of income. As well as racing, Eldar is a mercenary. During this race in particular, Wan Sandage paid for Sebulba to have a little accident. Eldar Bedo never managed to collect that bounty. Another of the surprising discoveries is how Elan Mak performed in the race. If you were to ask someone which of the pod racers was a joke, Elan Mak would be a top pick. After all, the entire pod racer is shaped as 3 balls.
Hey, I got a joke. Oh, let's hear it. Okay, what comes from outer space and has 3 balls? I don't know. E.T., the extra testicle.
One for the cockpit, and one is the body of each engine. The length of each engine is shorter than Anakin's engine, which is very uncommon. The only others would be Mahonic, Wan Sandage, Bumpy, and Quaderneros. This is an obsolete pod, a Kurtob KRT-410C. The best to compare might be Mahonic. In both cases, these engines start at their widest, then narrow down to a smaller exhaust. While there is room for a turbofan to work, I think all the air flows through the engine. Concentrating the airflow through a smaller exhaust nozzle like that should produce a higher velocity jet. In this case, with the spherical engine housing, I suspect another centrifugal compressor is behind the intake fan. Like Gasgano, we expect Elan Mak to skillfully use relatively small engines. We don't see this craft very often, more towards the beginning of the race. I expect to see him in the middle of the pack, yet he doesn't stay there. Early on, Elan Mak is up with Sebulba and Eldar Bedo. Later, he drops back to a group in the middle, where Anakin overtakes. Elan Mak is a Flagarian from Plu 4. In the end, he finished 5th. Now, I know what you're thinking. Perhaps you've looked up Elan Mak on the wiki, and found the name is written backwards. How could they have made such a mistake when it's written right there? Despite what you might be thinking, this is not a new development. I have traced this back to 2001. It is quite venerable lore. His name is Cam Nail. Eldar Bedo kills his father.
My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. Stop saying that!
This left Nail with a grudge and the remains of his father's criminal empire. He converted these assets into enough funds to buy a once great pod racer to enter the same race as Eldar Bedo. In the game, Elan Mak has terrible stats. A particular weakness is acceleration, the opposite of Arc Ruse. That makes sense. Mak has one turbine optimized for high speed, instead of an engine cluster. These stats imply that Elan Mak is an exceptional pilot, to have done well in this machine. The engines have a large scooped flap on the top, acting as an air brake. They are some of the largest braking surfaces relative to the engines. Another pod racer is often spoken of in the same breath. It's easy to see how these two are linked. Ebe E. Endicott has small engines with a red and white color scheme. They are named Jack Racing J930-8. Ebe is a Triffian from Triffus, an experienced racer. He has won 3 tournaments on Malastare. He was skilled enough to earn a new Corellian freighter. A light freighter costs 15 to 25,000 credits, used. To buy a new one costs at least 100,000 credits. With a track record like that, it's no wonder he survived to take 4th place.
It looks like Skywalker's moving up the field.
In terms of engine design, they couldn't be more different. Endicott's engines look a lot larger than they really are. There is a set of long sheets attached to the side, extending well in front of the engine intakes. They don't seem to have any purpose that I can see. Technically, they're similar to Sebulba's Split X, but far smaller. It's possible they might contain repulsor lift emitters. They would function as aerodynamic control surfaces, even if that is complex. By far the most likely explanation is that these are radiators. They extend forward, as far away from the hot parts of the engine as possible. For their entire length, cool air flows along the huge radiators. Personally, I would have a more complex shape to increase the surface area. This might be an ideal trade-off to minimize drag, and they provide enough cooling as they are. In the game, Ebe Endicott has great traction, cooling, and repair stats. That would line up with these being repulsor and radiator fins. The engines are quite narrow, though they do get wide at the middle. I believe this implies an axial compressor first, then perhaps a centrifugal one. I also consider it particularly likely that Endicott has afterburners installed. In the game, everyone has a boost ability, and cooling determines how much it can be used. That means Ebe does have relatively good afterburners. Next is one of the largest and most visually interesting of the pod races. Bowls Roar, with the large green egg-shaped engines. They are named Benghazi Quadrajet 4-barrel 904E. It's clear that this is just a shell, covering the true shape of the engines. There is a single large intake at the front and 4 small exhaust nozzles at the back. The top 2 are short, the bottom 2 are long. It would appear that Bowls Roar has a refinement of the engine cluster design. Where Arc Bumpy Ruse uses many engines with their own intakes, Bowls combines them. The intake compressor feeds each turbine more efficiently than it could manage itself. The 2 different lengths must have some functional purpose, like on Bumpy's cluster. If we look to the game, Bowls Roar is given extreme top speed. Traction and turning are both quite reasonable. Everything else is terrible. The logic of cluster engines granting better acceleration doesn't line up with that. To explain the speed, we need to look at the surface area. The air intake is not as large as on some pod races, but it is still quite large. The intake for each engine is larger than all the exhausts put together. It would logically follow that to get more air through a smaller area in the same time, it needs to go fast. When your exhaust velocity is nice and high, that should make for a substantial amount of thrust. Bowls Roar's position on the starting grid is 3rd row, as close to the center as would be possible. Bowls himself is a Sneevil from the planet Sneeve. He is announced as 2-time winner Bowls Roar. The visual dictionary doesn't agree. It declares the 2 times champion is out of his league. Further, that his pod is near stock and his skills are subpar. His previous 2 wins were in Bunta races. This is exactly his league. Doesn't line up with the movie at all, nor the fact that he seems to do fairly well in the race. Early on, we see him near Arc Bumpy Ruse, who ends up just behind the winners. It's possible that his previous wins have been in far easier races, but unlikely. I just don't believe the book's description. In the game, Bowls has unimpressive acceleration and cooling. Traction and turning and braking are quite decent. The top speed here is incredible, almost as good as Sebulba's. In fact, Bowls Roar seems to be nearly the same stat distribution as Sebulba. Incredible top speed, but his other stats are average instead of terrible. This makes Bowls Roar one of the least known but best choices in the game. Before this video, I hadn't planned to play Bowls Roar very much. Now, his pod racer looks like it may have become a favorite of mine. Now it is time for one of my favorites. If Odi Mandrell is second behind Timto, Clegg is third. Holdfast is a Nosorian from New Plimpto. He has much of the same style as Rats Terrell and Odi Mandrell. That is, an enormous air intake as wide in diameter as even Mars' Guo, followed by a turbine body that is at least as large as anyone else's. Clegg Holdfast also has a wide exhaust nozzle, more so than any other pod racer. The wide intake meets the diagnostic criteria to suggest a turbofan. However, we get a clear shot of this engine from the back.
And a late entry, young Anakin Skywalker, a local boy.
His position on the starting grid is the second row to Anakin's right. The shot pans from Rat's Tyrrell back over Clegg's engines to show the exhaust. There is no bypass duct, all the air passes through the engine. The intake air from the giant fan is constricted into a far narrower tube. This seems like an exceptional design of turbojet engine. They certainly have the size for it. The huge exhaust nozzle reminds me of Gascano's central cones. It forces the airflow through an even tighter space, so expect these to have extreme power. In the game, Clegg has very good traction and acceleration. Braking is a weakness, and top speed is not particularly good. Clegg is one of the few to be announced along with the name of his vehicle, a Voltec KT9 Wasp, which fits the relatively narrow middle of the engines.
Clegg Holdfast in his Voltec KT9 Wasp.
The full name being Quasar Voltec KV-99B Wasp, apparently. He barely appears after the race starts, despite his apparent confidence in medals. In the game, Clegg has almost no braking ability. Traction and acceleration are remarkably good. Other stats are less notable, but entirely sufficient. There is a cockpit animation, 2 wings that twist. This would act to roll the pod racer, but they're shown in use for all cornering. Holdfast has the dubious honor of being the one to taste Sebulba's flame emitter. He survived until halfway through the race, then was destroyed in the second lap. It turns out that the other racers see Clegg as a joke, which sounds a bit mean. They allege that Clegg is a journalist for Pod Racing Quarterly. That is a serious accusation. We mustn't throw the J word around lightly. We find incriminating evidence in the race results. Despite having his engines scattered across the desert, officially, Clegg finished 7th. That is last place, but surprising for a vehicle in a million fragments. We can only conclude that Clegg Holdfast used his journalistic connections to commit fraud. In order to look better, Holdfast had the official results changed. If there was one pod racer that is almost completely unremarkable, it would have to be this one. Juan Sandage has a simple, unobtrusive pod with no notable event during the race. He is barely in the movie, and his pod looks a lot like Mahonic's. An Elsinore Cordova Turbodyne 99U. For one thing, it's green, and the size is very similar. Like in that case, these must be based on power-to-weight ratios. Extreme speed through lightweight and pilot skill. Juan is a devlik from Ordradama. He has been racing professionally since he was 2 years old. That means little Annie is not the youngest pilot in the race. Juan Sandage was 6 years old at the time. The devlik lifespan is a decade on average. His position on the starting grid is the 5th and final row, to the left of Quadraneris. He's barely even in frame of the camera. Similarly, he doesn't appear much in the movie.
Corners of the outer...
You all set, Annie?
Yep.
Right. May the Force be with you.
We don't see Anakin overtake, we don't see Sebulba destroy his pod. He starts in the background and remains there throughout the race. Nobody gives him a second thought, or a first one. Much of the same logic from Mahonic applies to Sandage's engines. They compress a large cross-section of the air into a much smaller one, implying good exhaust velocity. Going back to the game, we see interesting stats on the vehicle. Top speed is Juan Sandage's weakness, explaining why he might fall behind. Sandage's cooling stat is also very low. Turning and acceleration are quite respectable. Traction and braking stats are incredibly high. This means Sandage has better control over his pod than anyone else. You may outrun him, but you cannot turn a tighter corner or brake as well. Juan Sandage specializes in finishing the race, not coming first. Nobody has reason to ram him because he isn't competing for the podium finish. By being so slow and unremarkable, Sandage avoids drawing any fire or animosity. That is a facade because Sandage hired Eldarbedo to go after Sebulba. Nor does he finish the race. Wan crashes into a sandcrawler before the finish line.
Pushy Whopper! Scotch a clunky!
And back again, it's the mighty Dud Bolt with that incredible racing machine, the Volpterine 327.
Dud Bolt looks like a crocodile. Volpterine 327 is the name of his vehicle. It also turns out to be the name of his species, from planet Volpter. There are two particularly distinctive parts to this, the front and the back. At the back is a structure that seems superfluous. It doesn't appear to be a rudder, it's just a hollow arch. It makes most sense as a radiator, especially since it's attached to the afterburner. The other most interesting structure is the wide, flat wedge intakes. Just like with Eldarbedo, these seem to deflect away a lot of air from the intakes. For that to be sensible, airflow must not be the performance bottleneck here. Improved air intakes cannot make Dud Bolt any faster, or he would have them. It seems clear there are repulsor lifts at the front, there's no room elsewhere. I was confused by these narrow intakes, so I went looking for answers. It appears hiding the intake is associated with anti-radar design. That makes sense. Pod racers are designed based on how cool jet fighters are. This is a feature from fighter jets, therefore it is cool. The real reason is simpler. The engines are backwards in the movie. There were originally large intakes at the front, coming down to a flat, narrow exhaust. Dud Bolt's position on the starting grid is the second row from the front. Anakin starts just to Dud's right. In the game, he has exceptional traction. Every other stat is on the line between mediocre and bad. Dud is another one who rarely appears in the race, no interaction with Anakin. The announcer describes his racing machine as incredible, so it must have some potential. The game also shows the exhaust extending all the way up the vertical section, when the movie shows a circular exhaust. The game also has a set of flaps that pivot out from Dud Bolt's engines. These flaps are used when steering or as air brakes. As it happens, Dud Bolt optimizes his vehicle for durability over speed. He is secretly being paid to support Sebulba during these races. Though we don't see it, Dud Bolt uses similar tactics of ramming to eliminate the competition. He gets paid cash for every opponent he causes to crash. During an attempt on Arc Bumpy Rose, both pod racers are eliminated from the running. A shame, since both could have done well otherwise. Finally, there is the strangest pod racer of them all, Sir not appearing in this film. All are unique, but some are more unique than others. Never Key has a pod racer that's been constructed backwards. There are no control cables attaching the engines to the pod cockpit. The pilot's seat is just in front of the engine intakes, potentially a hazardous design. This pod racer has a rigid chassis that all components are firmly bolted to. Its model is Farwan and Glott FG8TH Twin Block 2 Special. This is not the standard design, and I imagine there is a reason for that. Aside from the odd layout, Never Key has quite a good pod racer. The engines are as large as any in the race, so we expect similar performance. One consequence is that the giant engines are outside your field of vision. Anakin can see when there's an engine fire, without needing to rely on the instruments. Assuming all is well, that ought to make no real difference. Another consequence is that the jet exhaust is behind the pilot, which seems like a safety feature. In the game, Never Key has bad turning, cooling, and top speed. Air braking and acceleration are remarkably good, better than most. Traction is about as good as it is possible to be. Traction must refer to the repulsor lifts, which are probably simpler on a rigid vehicle. The game has an animation on the engines, with large fins in a ring around the exhaust nozzle. These can be deployed as air brakes for steering or stopping. Never Key never actually appears in the movie, yet he is well known among the fans.
What do you mean by that?
I'll tell you later. Good morning.
Never is a Zamster from the planet Zegobar. With a name like that, Surely he must be the hoopiest fruit in the race. He was too cool to finish the race and officially wandered off. That's a euphemism if I've ever heard one, given he was never seen again. His pod racer does appear on the cover of a book in the Jedi Quest series. In this story, Anakin is dragged back into the racing scene during his Jedi training. This pod was likely chosen because the camera can be closer to the pilot, while still showing the engines. In the actual book, I don't believe Neverkey turns up at all.
Very fast, very dangerous.
I'm the only human who can do it.
Outlanders, they come here. How do they find me? They come here, they mess up my store. Hey!
The pod racing game is relatively old now, as you may have noticed. Its full title is Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. Quite a mouthful, but I bet it did well in search results at the time. While it isn't overly complex, it was an excellent simulation for its time. Every vehicle is recreated with enough quality to be recognized. The same goes for the pilots. But the real key is the sound.
Come on, come on, come on, work!
There are dozens of easily recognizable sounds throughout. Everything sounds like it should. The music is a bit loud by default, and does get repetitive. Having the familiar music just adds another layer of simulation. Racer is available on Steam and GOG, and it runs well with little to no tweaking. The most surprising aspect of playing it is the control scheme. The throttle is bound to W, right trigger, and A. Turning left and right is with the cursor keys, or left stick. A and D, or right stick to the side, is to flip the pod on its side for narrow gaps. Left stick forward and back, or arrow keys up and down, tilt the pod's engines. Tilt nose down is required for a second before you can boost. Tilting the engines up should let you jump a longer distance, I think. Braking is on S, or B and right trigger. Boost is X on controller, or shift the sprint button. Later on, a sequel was released. Its name was Racer Revenge, and it was exclusive to the PlayStation 2. Where the first game was on everything but the PS1, the next was only on the PS2. I had been aware of a Jango Fett and Jedi Starfighter game on PS2 before my research. Despite enjoying the original, I didn't know about Racer Revenge. The most notable changes in this version seem to be that Anakin is years older, and the cockpit hover. In the original, the cockpit floats in the same position as during the race, meters in the air. Racer Revenge has the cockpit low and the cables hanging down from the engines. I'm not sure which version I prefer. Gameplay seems largely the same as the last game. The most striking change is that you are expected to survive the entire race. When it comes to actually playing the game, there are two parts. Before and between each race, you need to select your pod racer. There is a good selection to start with, including Anakin's pod. Everyone who was missing can be unlocked by satisfying some sort of challenge. You will get a few unlocked during your first tournament. After a race, you will be paid in Truguts. Truguts. These can be used to buy upgrade parts from Watto's shop.
Welcome to Watto's shop, huh? Take a look around. I got everything you need, huh?
All parts are essential to the functionality of the pod racer. They cannot be removed, only downgraded. Each upgrade part affects a single stat of the pod racer. Air brakes will only affect braking, never acceleration. The complication is that each part has an individual durability level. Each part wears out over the course of a few races. This will make your pod racer worse handling in every aspect. You could buy replacement parts as each one wears out, but only cheap ones. Instead, buying a pit droid will keep one upgraded part in working order.
Oh, you want to buy pit droid, huh? They help you fix your pod racer, you know.
You can only have 4 pit droids, so you have to pick your upgrade parts carefully. When it comes to the racing itself, there is a certain amount of skill in flying around obstacles. If you run into a cave wall and explode, you respawn back on track. This is very convenient because some races are still difficult for me to survive. Knowing the track beforehand is extremely helpful, but there is a map. Most of the gameplay comes from managing your boost. Cooling is the stat that determines how long you can boost for and how quickly it recharges. Boost too long and it causes an engine fire. Each engine also has durability to be lost through collisions. Luckily, there is also the option to repair while you're in flight. It can't replace an engine that's been destroyed, that still requires respawning. While you can build a pod to avoid using the boost, it is generally powerful. The trick to every course is finding when and where you can get away with boosting. It requires a minimum speed before the boost is unlocked. You need to tilt the engines to charge the boost, which generally takes a straight for me to use. Some corners I can even maintain a boost through. This boost is the core of the racing gameplay. All things considered, the game is an exceptional simulation. It can be somewhat confusing. Knowing the track and its specific shortcuts can make a tremendous difference. Overall, the campaign is compelling enough to extract tens of hours of racing from. Difficulty is generally forgiving in allowing you to cross the finish line. To advance to the next level, you need to place at least 3rd in the previous race. You also have control over the prize distribution within the top few places. If you expect to win, set it so the entire prize pool goes to 1st place. When you can't be sure of that, set it to a more even split. With enough money, parts, and unlocked vehicles, it gets easier. If you find the race too easy, you can reduce the stats of your pod racer to achieve game balance. If you like our content, there are 2 ways to support us. Become a patron at patreon.com/thebreadcircus, or like, comment, and subscribe. Only the former option guarantees that your name lives on in history. The other is embarrassing YouTubey stuff. Brandon Smith is clearly using a pseudonym. Das Log Tractor has a Lamborghini tractor he wants us to know about. It's a nice tractor. Conk, a Discord moderator. And Zafrex, whose name sounds like a pill you would take to calm down while scrolling your Twitter timeline. Nice guy, honestly.
What, you think you're some kind of Jedi waving your hand around like that? I'm a Toydarian. My tricks don't work on me. Only money. No money, no parts, no deal.